Thank you for coming out on this cold night. I love the autumn here at Penn State. It brings back so many incredible memories, and I'm happy tonight that some of my dear friends from my time here, those very special years, have decided to join us here tonight. And we're going to have a really interesting conversation. I think the best way I can describe the world as we know it today is that it's in an ultra-fast period of change. And you know, my coming back to Penn State is sort of me wanting to connect and feel part and belong to the community that means so much to me. And I've never been one to look back or sort of be nostalgic about things. As Dean Welsh said, I don't come back often enough. I've been primarily focused in my life on doing the exact opposite. I love change, which is why I think I was drawn to the technology industry. For all those years. I love to be chasing the next new thing. But right now, the exponential pace of change and the implications has left me, even someone like me who's addicted to change, feeling a bit uneasy. So much so I've realized that it's important to take stock from time to time, to come back to be with family and friends, if only to ensure that we still believe in what we've always taken for granted. So a documentary filmmaker called Adam Curtis recently explored this uneasy feeling in his film Hypernormalization. He called it transparent disenchantment, a sense that technology accelerates at an exponential rate, and with it comes unforeseen consequences. Things that are obviously not quite right, yet we're unsure as to what, if anything, we can do about it. Are any of you guys in the audience fans of Mr. Robot or Black Mirror? Any of you kids? Okay. Well, then you're going to understand what we're talking about this evening. You'll understand exactly what I mean when I say that technology is accelerating at a pace that is making all of us feel somewhat uneasy. Let's take a look at this picture behind me, for example. It was taken at a Hillary Clinton rally in Florida just recently. I know, it's incredible, right? Nobody's looking at the candidate. No one. I just wanted to ask you a question. When did creating a personal record become more important than living the experience? Let's click to the next slide. Consider these two pictures. Back in 2005, these are both taken at the Vatican at the same location, 8 years apart. The first one shows a gathering of the faithful, an expression of shared devotion. Everybody's focused on what lies ahead. If you look at the second picture in 2013, it shows the crowd in the same place, but the experience has completely changed. It's being viewed entirely through a screen. Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about the realities of life lived increasingly behind screens, and about how technology is challenging our social and political systems and ramifications it has on our safety, our security, and our well-being. For context, I thought I'd take you back to 1984. My glorious year, my last year here at Penn State University. This is the year I graduated from Penn State. Now, 1984, for you, those of you who are in my generation, know that it's probably better known for George Orwell's dystopian tale than anything else that actually transpired that year. Exactly. But the world then, as it is now, was in a precarious state. So I'm going to... A singular moment in pop culture that year became a watershed in the history of our relationship with technology. A commercial directed by the famous director Ridley Scott was aired during the Super Bowl. I don't know if any of you remember this. Some people weren't born then, but I can tell the front row actually remembers. It's important because the message it provided to the millions of people who watched that commercial was that computers were not going to enslave us. In fact, computers and the companies that made them were going to set us free. Now let's take a look.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of
Apple computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Amazing, huh? I showed that to my 17-year-old son, and he's like, Mom, that's pretty cool. So 1984, if you remember, it was the height of the Cold War. And my generation, we lived in this existential fear of some impending nuclear attack. The war of words that played out was, in Western media and Soviet propaganda, was so threatening and anxiety-provoking. We had this doomsday clock that we all used to look at to see how the latest actions between the US and Russia were playing out and how close we were to nuclear war. Words then were a weapon, much like they are today. The only difference was that they were used much more carefully then. There was an appreciation of the power and the sanctity of the meaning of words, which in the age of social media has all but disappeared. Back then, every phrase was carefully crafted, lest we trigger the unthinkable. Every story researched and fact-checked. And journalism performed a public service of delivering the truth. It's hard to imagine that given today's hyper-communicative, 140-character news environment. What's different in that is today's war of words, extreme views are amplified by algorithms that spread and legitimize things like xenophobia, nationalism. And many of these blame narratives are not just resonating in America, but they're resonating globally. There are many factors driving this rhetoric. We've experienced a decade of powerful economic headwinds, leaving many people disenfranchised. The recent spate of deadly terror attacks over the summer have incited fear and the desire for people to keep others out. Tens of millions of desperate migrants are on the move, fleeing war and conflict zones, and they're struggling to find sanctuary and a new place to belong. We are witnessing the frightening rebirth of far-right parties and movements across Europe, and of course, the incredibly divisive presidential campaign, which can't seem to end soon enough. During times of these like great change, the natural human instinct is to retreat into us versus them narratives, to act as if it's a zero-sum game, and we need to protect ourselves, even scapegoat others for our misfortunes. And there's no denying that intolerance and ignorance of a dangerous kind are creeping into mainstream media and online social discourse, redefining what is acceptable in terms of extreme. Social media has become an echo chamber of fear-mongering and intolerance. In free and democratic societies like ours, even the worst zealots and bigots are entitled to their opinions. But what has changed is the internet gives them a platform to take their hateful messages and violent provocations to millions with impunity. If I had been delivering this speech back in 2010, we would have been celebrating the triumph of the Arab Spring, a new Middle East rising run by young activists with visions of uniting the world. You would have thought we were on our way to an enlightened and more peaceful time. But the hyperbole was just that. Things didn't happen as expected. Quite the opposite, in fact. Propelled by technological platforms, the movement got ahead of the region's ability to transition and the realities of political reform. It created a vacuum of power. You might ask, how could this happen? We just spent the last 3 decades building the technology that connected the world and was supposed to bring us all close together, to turn us into a global village. Now, on balance, even with all the terrible things that are happening in the world is definitely more connected and interdependent than ever before. It's shaped less by boundaries of nation states and more by platforms and services that unite us beyond boundaries. But this new world is experiencing some major growing pains. And the fact is that today, many people are feeling anxious, some feeling disenfranchised and others feeling left behind. All this great innovation has yet to fix the economic realities of a new world where technology and globalization are replacing jobs with robots and shifting them to places with lower costs of production. So how do we build a more inclusive and equitable society? How do we change a world that, despite all of its progress, seems unfairly tilted to benefit a few, to one that enables everyone's dreams? We can start by giving ourselves a break and recognizing that we are, in fact, living through the biggest social experiment in human history. I realize this might sound controversial, it might even sound Orwellian to you, but hear me out. These changes facilitated by technology are not just impacting how we live our lives and interact with each other. They're influencing our ideas, our opinions, and redefining who we are. As digital life evolves and becomes more and more ubiquitous, there are unexpected consequences. Consequences that challenge our very humanity and that require us to ask difficult questions. When it comes to people's personal information, what is the new duty of care? What is in the public interest? What are our collective and moral responsibilities? And how do we ensure that human empathy, compassion, and respect remain a vital part of the equation? Today, you might not realize it, but there are over 3 billion people online. That's approaching nearly half the world's population, communicating with and learning from each other and experiencing life in previously unimaginable ways. People who would otherwise never had a voice, never had an opportunity, and people for whom the next great invention might come from now that they have a chance. That's a remarkable achievement, and it represents incredible opportunities for all of us. Our lives are without a doubt easier, more convenient, and more efficient. Tonight, your location and the number of people connecting from it determine how many Uber drivers will be available when you want to go home. You scroll through your news feed, you click on something of interest to you, and with hours that impulse purchase arrives at your door, and it might just be delivered by a drone. With a tap of a finger, you can participate in, you can lend your name to global campaigns and movements and make your voice heard on a topic or issue that you care about. And in a brilliant execution of scale and product development, a handful of great businesses, incidentally mostly American businesses, have become the dominant global social platforms, and social networks, commerce platforms, and communications and transportation apps that we use every day and that people all around the world use, in the billions. These are amazing benefits for sure, but in exchange for all of this, we give up something too. When you click agree on online terms and conditions, you consent to give away insights into your behavior, your lifestyle, your spending habits. Mine are quite you reveal your actions and wishes to a virtual machine that sometimes, as a result, understands us better than we understand ourselves. Well, the jury is still out on the efficacy of these tools. Their direction is clear. Their direction is to capture every human interaction and be able to act on it. Apple's CEO Tim Cook recently said in a speech, "Some of the most prominent and successful companies have built their businesses by lulling their customers into complacency about their personal information, and they're gobbling up everything they can learn about you and trying to monetize it." Now, whatever you think of Apple or Tim Cook, his quote certainly gives us pause to think. Yet, in spite of all the headline-grabbing, anxiety-provoking stuff that we consume every day in our public debate on privacy and security, in general, if you ask most people, they just really aren't that bothered. I wonder why. Well, let's go back to Orwell's 1984 for a second and consider, in the context of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Do you guys remember Brave New World? It was published in 1932. Even I wasn't around then. So Orwell envisioned a society controlled by fear. Huxley foretold a society controlled by pleasure. Which one do you like? So what concerned Orwell, according to media critic Neil Postman, were those who would deprive us of information. But what Huxley feared were those who would give us so much information that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Sound familiar? Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. I'm going to take a vote in a second. Does any of this sound familiar in the context of life today? Postman represented the frightful possibility that Huxley, not Orwell, was right. But might I suggest that perhaps they were both right? So let's talk about this upcoming election, which can't come soon enough. Let's talk about who's hijacking our virtual utopia. Elections are the ultimate expression of our democracy, but by any measure, this one is different. It's not only been characterized by pure spectacle, which we see every night on the news and in every news feed that we read, but also by the intervention of rogue state actors, hacking servers, private servers, leaking information to shape public opinion from the outside. It's unprecedented. And today, the weapons of conventional war have changed too. Night after night on our evening news, we hear about selectively targeted drone strikes, the consequences of which are disturbingly detached from reality. And extremist groups like Daesh, or the so-called Islamic State, have been quick to leverage the scale and reach of social networks to wage a digital insurgency and disseminate propaganda online aimed at hijacking the minds of the vulnerable young people in the privacy of their own homes. While Daesh's physical positions continue to be compromised, they are shifting their strategies and tactics to fighting a second war online for the hearts and minds of the next generation. Their messages are professionally produced and delivered in 20 languages. They produce Hollywood-style recruitment films that glorify violence and include the latest game-quality computer-generated imagery. They've become a powerful global brand. Now let me be clear, technology is by no means creating hate. It's simply exposing it and sometimes amplifying it. There is what I call a fundamental asymmetry of passion that exists in extremist rhetoric online, which invokes a strong reaction from algorithms, making divisive posts rise to the surface and giving them the appearance that they reflect widely held views when in fact they reflect extreme or fringe views. And with so many choices in news and information, and the natural human tendency to seek out people who agree with us, extreme views are reinforced in an uncontested online echo chamber. As Emerson Brooking and P.W. Singer wrote in the recent Atlantic article just a few weeks ago, in an article called War Goes Viral, within a circle of friends or like-minded acquaintances, they said, social media certainly fosters connection. But the further one zooms out to whole societies or the course of global affairs, the more this connection is marred by tribalism and mutual interest. Moreover, what happens when social media propagates the view that you can't trust anyone? Recently, a Finnish journalist called Jessica Aro, she wrote exactly that some news organizations are trying to create this feeling where people no longer trust any news. In a recent article, she explores how Russia Today, known as RT to many people, is already the largest news network on YouTube. Its aim, she said, is not to make us love Putin, she said. The aim is to make you disbelieve everything. A disbelieving, fragile, unconscious audience is much easier to manipulate, she said. And the generation most at risk to this harmful content and these illegal influences is the first generation to grow up more technologically literate than their parents and their teachers. They have lived their lives almost entirely connected to digital devices. This leaves them open and susceptible to influences online, where they are not monitored or supervised, open to opinions in an uncontested space. Take, for example, criminals with a sexual interest in children. They join forces with other offenders online to abuse children on a mass scale. They pay to watch child sexual abuse live streamed all over the world. And children are being groomed and coerced into producing sexually explicit images by people they've never met, sometimes in countries far away. Encryption provides the perfect cover, and cryptocurrency mechanisms obfuscate their transactions. So what do we do, guys? Evil isn't going away anytime soon, and it has access to the same technology and tools that we do. Working with technology industry leaders, we have to fight fire with fire. Using technology, we must outsmart them. We must thwart them, and we must stay one step ahead of them. We don't always succeed, but we are taking back control, and we won't let them claim ownership of or abuse the platforms and applications that we love and use every day. This has become a life mission for me. 2 years ago, I founded an organization called We Protect. What underpins the strategy of We Protect is that for internet harms and crimes, it takes all of us. It takes everyone involved in the fight. It's not enough for police or government or internet companies to do their own thing. To eradicate online child sexual exploitation requires a multi-stakeholder approach. We must leverage the power of technology to rescue victims, thwart criminals, and bring perpetrators to justice. With the support of Prime Minister Theresa May and the leaders of over 70 governments, law enforcement, tech companies, and NGOs, we are making great progress, but we will never stop until every child can use the internet without fear. If you've never been a victim of an online crime or abuse, or know someone who has been, this might seem a bit foreign to you, but it becomes real when you meet a mother whose son was so distraught from incessant cyberbullying that he committed suicide. It becomes real when you're sitting with the parents of a preschooler who was abducted and murdered by a pedophile, who just hours before was looking at child sexual abuse images available freely online. It becomes real to you when you meet the mother whose teenage son, the same age as your own son, fell under the spell of Daesh or the so-called Islamic State online, and he traveled to Syria to fight and was killed. It becomes real to you when you meet the parents of a daughter who's been exposed to a self-harm site, who's in the hospital again because she can't stop hurting herself. In the physical world, people expect governments to protect them. That's how it's always been. But who protects them in the online world? Who is responsible for our safety there? I was recently asked this question, and it made me think, is social media really making us more lonely? To answer that question, I wanted to take a minute and share this passage from Olivia Lang's recent book, The Lonely City: Adventures in the Art of Being Alone. This passage wasn't intended by Lang to be a comment on the psychological impact of social media. However, it struck me as the perfect description of the uneasy state we often find ourselves in. A state in an age where we always have something to read, we always have someone to interact with, and yet at sometimes we feel very, very much alone. In her book, she said this. She said, imagine standing by a window at night on the 6th, the 17th, or the 43rd floor of a building. The city reveals itself as a set of cells, 100,000 windows, some darkened, some flooded with green, white, or golden light. Inside, strangers swim to and fro, attending to their business of their private hours. You can see them, but you can't reach them. And so this common urban phenomenon, available in any city of the world on any night, conveys to even the most social a tremor of loneliness, with its uneasy combination of separation and exposure. Social media gives us this illusion of being connected. We feel like we're with our friends, they're at our fingertips. Whereas in reality, the true connection that we crave, one that resonates deeply enough to nourish and support us, is not always accessible in this virtual space. Nevertheless, we're addicted. We go back again and again, sometimes every minute of our day. Social media is an easy fix. As a result, true solitude is very rare. We are becoming less and less able to spend time alone. And when we are alone, we fear we're missing out. Now, we've gained a great deal from technology, but are we compromising essential human skills in the process? Listening, for example, requires incredible patience, emotional intelligence, and humility. And if we persist and keep an open mind when we're listening, we may learn something, a vivid new word, a hidden perspective, a new point of view. And what about that most important human experience, friendship? How do we make a friend these days? It used to be we'd spend time together. We'd start talking. We'd discover shared interests. In the social media age, we make a friend in 2 steps. One, we say friend request. The other person says friend request accepted. That's it. We're ascribing friendship to people we barely know, and we may never meet in person. This commoditization of friendship encourages us to focus on quantity rather than quality of our relationships. If there was a scale denoting the level of emotional nourishment you gain from each type of social interaction, where do you think sharing a comment on Instagram would score versus meeting a friend for a coffee? From what experience do you think you gain more? If you're trying to build meaningful relationships from scratch, it's difficult to cultivate connections online that give you a true sense of belonging, that sense of belonging I spoke about at the very beginning, a true sense that you are understood. I read somewhere recently that you're never as happy as you seem on Instagram, you're never as miserable as you seem on Twitter, and you're never as employable as you seem on LinkedIn. Hallelujah. Well, we got to put our best foot forward, right? We laugh, you guys, but it is true. And with so much currency, social currency, given to likes and followers, the pressure to appear relevant and popular, it's no wonder we risk losing more young people to a solitary existence online. So whilst my generation got to dream about this utopian digital world, as you saw in the 1984 commercial, your world has to deal with a complex reality. In this interconnected world, we are connected to over billions and billions of people. But no one person, no company, no country for that matter, can solve all these problems alone. It takes us all. Although this past year has brought us many challenges, it's also offered great hope. We've been shown that when the world comes together, we can achieve unprecedented things. For instance, leveraging the latest innovation in medicine and emergency disease response, a global effort brought the Ebola crisis to resolution in just 10 months and saved hundreds of thousands of people. The world came together to sign a historic climate change agreement in Paris, putting us on a course for a safe and more stable environment. As President Obama said, he's guest editor of Wired this month if you haven't seen it. He said this in Wired magazine, and it struck me as really perfect quote for this evening. He said, "We are far better equipped to take on the challenges we face than ever before. I know it might sound at odds with what you see and hear these days in the cacophony of cable news and social media. But the next time you're bombarded with the over-the-top claims about how our country is doomed or how the world is coming apart at the seams, brush off the cynics and fear-mongers, because the truth is, if you had to choose any time in the course of human history to be alive, you'd choose right now, right here in America." Over the past 30 years, I've seen the digital world being built from the ground up. From developing silicon chips and hardware that made things digital, to pioneering the birth of audio and video online. From digitizing the world's information and making it accessible and useful to billions of people, to giving people the power to broadcast themselves. Remember YouTube? And finally, creating new ways for people to share and connect the world. There is no doubt that all this incredible innovation has transformed our lives and will continue to do so. But in the end, the transformational moments in life have always been and always will be about people. It's the human bonds that define us. And today, the power of the individual is amplified like never before. Each one of us has the power to do more good than any of those who came before us. The world isn't happening to us, guys. We are creating it, and we have the power to shape its future. If we understand the profound and nuanced ways technology is impacting us, we can learn how to harness and enhance our experience of being alive. No matter how advanced and pragmatic technology becomes, we have to make sure we're still looking into people's eyes, not just into screens, and that we're listening to the words they speak and having meaningful conversations. That we are not so desensitized by the masses of information and innovation that we consume every day, that we stop exploring and developing our critical thinking, or lose our internal sense of self, that which guides us from within. We must make sure that our own moral compass is pointing in the right direction, that a sense of humanity, empathy, and meaningful connection is well established within us. And to finally quote another former president, an amazing president, Jimmy Carter, he said, "We must adjust to changing times and still hold on to unchanging principles." Change, my friends, is the new normal, and we need to embrace it by being certain in our own actions. As the leaders of this next phase of connected humanity, yes, that's you, remember that technology will continue to become more powerful, but the decisions you make will still be your own.